Modern Star Trek pretty much admits Deep Space Nine is still the franchise's outcast 32 years later. When Star Trek Deep Space Nine premiered in 1993, it was already seen as the odd sibling in the Star Trek family. A space station instead of a starship? A brooding commander instead of a dashing captain? Political intrigue and war stories instead of episodic adventures of the week? Fans and critics alike weren't sure what to make of it. Yet over the years, DS9 has grown into a cult favorite, widely regarded as one of the franchise's deepest and most daring entries. And yet, despite its reputation among longtime fans as the most ambitious Trek series, modern Star Trek still treats DS9 like the outcast of the franchise. It's been 32 years since the show premiered, and even in this era of interconnected streaming Trek, with multiple spin-offs, nostalgic cameos, and constant homages, DS9 remains noticeably sidelined. If anything, the way Strange New Worlds, Picard, Lower Decks, and Discovery reference legacy Trek pretty much confirms that DS9 is still the black sheep. Why? The reasons are layered, rooted in DS9's history, its themes, and its complicated place within the Trek mythos. But one thing is clear, while the other Trek series are celebrated and revisited, Deep Space Nine continues to orbit at the edge of the Federation spotlight, a vital part of Trek history, but never quite embraced. Nostalgia rules modern Star Trek, except for DS9. If you look at Paramount's approach to Star Trek in the streaming era, it's clear nostalgia is the driving force. Picard has been entirely about revisiting the next generation's characters, stories, and villains. Strange New Worlds revels in recreating the original series' aesthetic while modernizing its characters. Even Lower Decks, the franchise's animated comedy, thrives on Easter eggs and callbacks to all corners of Trek lore. But when it comes to DS9, the nostalgia machine barely touches it. Yes, Lower Decks gave fans a fun visit back to the station in its third season, complete with Kira and Quark popping up in cameos. But that's been the rare exception rather than the rule. Meanwhile, Voyager has gotten Janeway back in Prodigy, Seven of Nine as a main character in Picard, and even the Doctor referenced in dialogue. DS9's characters, on the other hand, are practically absent. Where is the Sisko revival? The Dominion War retrospectives? A series revisiting Bajor, Cardassia, or the Gamma Quadrant? Instead, DS9 is mostly left as a set of half-remembered footnotes. For a franchise that thrives on mining nostalgia, the lack of love for DS9 stands out like a wormhole opening in the middle of Federation space. DS9 was never a comfortable fit for Trek's optimism. Part of DS9's outsider status comes from its tone. Unlike other Trek series, which often leaned into optimism and episodic morality tales, DS9 thrived in the gray areas. It was serialized before serialization became the standard, exploring war, religion, political corruption, and moral compromise. Captain Sisko didn't always follow Starfleet rules. He was willing to manipulate, deceive, and even cross ethical lines to protect the Federation. The Dominion War arc forced Trek into a narrative of occupation, resistance, and the cost of survival. For many fans in the 1990s, this was too far from Gene Roddenberry's utopian vision. Even today, with prestige television audiences more accustomed to serialized anti-heroes, DS9's willingness to question Starfleet and present a darker Federation makes it feel like an outlier in the official narrative. Modern Trek, for all its ambition, still tends to lean on the comfort of optimism, whether it's the adventurous tone of Strange New Worlds or the redemptive nostalgia of Picard. DS9 remains harder to integrate because it thrives on discomfort. The problem of Benjamin Sisko. Another factor in DS9's marginalization is its lead, Captain Benjamin Sisko. Played with charisma and gravitas by Avery Brooks, Sisko is arguably one of Trek's greatest captains. He was the first black lead in the franchise, a single father, a community builder, and a spiritual figure as the emissary of the prophets. But Sisko has never gotten the same treatment as Kirk, Picard, or even Janeway in modern Trek discourse. Part of this is because Avery Brooks himself has largely stepped away from Hollywood, and without his willingness to return, Paramount seems hesitant to revisit Sisko's story. while Picard gets a multi-season send-off and Janeway is resurrected as an animated mentor. Sisko's legacy is left mostly untouched. The tragedy is that Sisko is perhaps the most layered of all Trek captains, a man who bridged human politics and spiritual destiny, who navigated both diplomacy and total war. Yet his absence in modern Trek canon reinforces the perception that DS9 and its captain don't fit neatly into the revival strategy. DS9's legacy is everywhere, even if it's not acknowledged. Ironically, while modern Trek tends to sideline DS9, the series' DNA is all over the franchise. Serialized storytelling? DS9 pioneered it for Trek. Complex interplanetary politics? DS9 did it first with Bajor, Cardassia, and the Dominion. Willingness to question Starfleet's morality? That's a DS9 specialty, now echoed in Discovery and Picard. Even Strange New Worlds experiments with long-running arcs and emotional character drama owe a debt to DS9's structure. And yet, this influence is rarely acknowledged outright. It's as if DS9 is the shadow architect of modern Trek storytelling, always present, but never celebrated. In this sense, DS9 is the outcast not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. It reshaped Trek into something riskier and more serialized, but Paramount seems reluctant to admit that DS9 set the template for the very kind of television they're now making. The Dominion War deserves its due. Perhaps the biggest example of DS9's sideline legacy is the Dominion War. This multi-season arc was the most ambitious narrative Trek had ever attempted, chronicling the Federation's largest conflict in history. It was serialized, morally ambiguous, and filled with consequences that should still resonate in the 25th century timeline. And yet, modern Trek barely mentions it. Picard Season 3 briefly referenced the Changelings, but even then, the war itself was treated as background context rather than a defining event in Federation history. Imagine if a modern Star Wars series barely acknowledged the Galactic Civil War. Unthinkable. And yet Trek does exactly that with DS9's most important contribution. This silence underscores DS9's status as an outcast. Even its monumental storylines are quietly downplayed rather than embraced. Why fans keep fighting for DS9? Despite Paramount's ambivalence, DS9 endures because of its fans. The documentary What We Left Behind 2019 proved there's immense passion for the show, raising funds through crowdfunding and reminding audiences how groundbreaking DS9 really was. Online, DS9 fans are among the most vocal, constantly calling for Blu-ray remasters, spin-offs, or even animated continuations. The irony is that DS9 is beloved precisely for the reasons it's sidelined. Fans cherish its willingness to be messy, serialized, and morally complex. They see Sisko as a captain who broke the mold, and they recognize that DS9's explorations of war, faith, and identity feel more relevant than ever. Modern Trek may treat DS9 as an outcast, but fans continue to elevate it as a masterpiece. In a way, that outsider status has become part of the show's identity. It's the Trek series that refused to conform, and that defiance is exactly why it endures. The future of DS9 in modern Trek. So will DS9 always be the outcast? Not necessarily. As Paramount continues to expand its Trek slate, there are opportunities to bring DS9 back into the